In the early 20th century, Cincinnati, Ohio experienced significant growth, especially in transportation. In the northwest neighborhood of Cumminsville, 3 prominent rail transit lines served the area: the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad along the southern end, the Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railway on the northern end, and the Cincinnati Street Railway through the center. Together, these lines transported nearly 1 million passengers a year. On April 30th, 1904, 32-year-old Mary McDonald from Saginaw, Michigan, was found murdered near the Big Four railroad tracks. McDonald, who shared a residence on East 7th Street with 24-year-old Mrs. Finley, was seen by multiple witnesses near Chester Park on the day of her death. Later, she visited the Stagman family's home near Knowlton's Corner, where Charles Stagman eventually offered her a ride back to the city. Around 11 p.m., he dropped her off on College Hill Main Street. This was the last confirmed sighting of her. The following morning, a freight train engineer discovered McDonald gravely injured, lying on the railway. She was rushed to the city hospital, where she could only say her name before succumbing to her injuries. She had a bruise on the back of her head, a severe leg amputation, and had been robbed. 2 theories emerged. Either she was murdered out of jealousy, or a heavily intoxicated McDonald, allegedly accompanied by someone, was struck by an oncoming train. However, there was no evidence to support either theory, especially as local conductors and motormen had no recollection of a woman matching her description boarding a streetcar. McDonald's case quickly faded into obscurity. On October 2nd, Louise Muller's body was found in a patch of weeds along the district's Lover's Lane. She had suffered 2 deep facial wounds, and her skull was fractured at the base. Witnesses reported that Muller, who had several romantic partners, had plans to meet her lover, Frank Eastman, that evening. Earlier, she had been seen near her home listening to a solicitor speak, close to the Lover's Lane area. Initially, investigators considered that she may have been hit by a train, but later reclassified the case as a possible homicide. Despite efforts, there were no strong leads, as Muller had no known enemies and maintained friendly relationships with her partners. On November 3rd, the body of 18-year-old Alma Steinegwig, a respected telephone operator and choir singer at her local Episcopal church, was discovered in a vacant lot near Spring Grove Cemetery by a streetcar conductor. Her head had been brutally bludgeoned with a club, her eyes were wide open, some teeth were missing, and her face lay in a pool of blood. In her hand, she clutched a transfer ticket. The bloody trail suggested her body had been dragged onto the field by a large man, evident from the heavy boot prints left behind. The day before, Steinegwig had left her office after receiving a call from her boyfriend, who offered to pick her up. She declined, explaining that she was tired after a dance and just wanted to go home. Conductor Frank Lemie later reported seeing her on the streetcar with a man who frequently rode alongside her. It is believed that Steinegwig was attacked while waiting for a transit car in Winton, struck from behind before she could react. During his initial murder spree in 1904, the killer also targeted several other women, who later provided descriptions of their assailant. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to claim another victim, the killer went dormant for 6 years. On New Year's Eve, 1909, the body of 36-year-old secretary Anna Lloyd for Wilborg Hanna Lumber Company was discovered near the railroad tracks in Cumminsville. Police reported that just 20 minutes after leaving her workplace alone for the first time, Lloyd was waiting for a trolley near Spring Grove Cemetery when she was attacked. The assailant dragged her aside and, after a violent struggle with the physically strong Lloyd, managed to kill her, possibly using a butcher's meat cleaver. The next morning, her body was discovered either by 2 boys or a passerby who quickly notified authorities. Police later found Lloyd's satchel about a mile from the scene, with her money missing. Emma Lloyd, her mother, fell gravely ill from the ordeal, while her husband, Edward Togg, demanded more effective efforts from the police to find the killer. Tensions surrounding the murder grew so intense that authorities feared it might incite a race war. In response, the Cincinnati City Council offered a $2,500 reward, while Lloyd's employer, Wilborg Hanna Lumber Company, posted an additional $5,000 reward. On October 26, 1910, the body of 26-year-old Mary Hackney was found in her Canal Ridge boarding house by her husband Harley and fellow boarder Charles Eckert. The couple had moved to the city from Louisville, Kentucky in 1906. Hackney's throat had been slashed from ear to ear, her skull crushed, and her body and face were deeply cut in several places, seemingly with an axe. Despite a thorough search, police found no evidence of any other crime at the scene. Although the killer left behind a bloodied axe and a bloody thumbprint on the doorframe, investigators were unable to trace them. In a final attempt to gather more clues, authorities drained a nearby canal, but no additional evidence was uncovered. According to the women who survived attacks by the Cumminsville Killer, he was short, heavily built, and wore a dark slouch hat. However, descriptions of his race varied, some survivors believing he was white, while others thought he was black. On January 13th, police received a letter from someone claiming to have witnessed Lloyd's murder and seen her killer. They attempted to contact the author, identified only as SDM, but later discovered the letter was a cruel hoax. Henry Cook, a butcher by trade, was the primary suspect in Lloyd's murder after two witnesses, including 14-year-old Tilly Krebs, identified him as one of the two men seen leaving the crime scene on the night of the murder. Following his arrest, Cook appeared before the magistrate, with his bond set at $1,000. No known newspapers covered the case's outcome, though it is likely Cook was released due to insufficient evidence. George Lewis, a Marine fireman from Cleveland, was also arrested in Wyoming, Ohio. Initially, he gave vague answers about his whereabouts during Lloyd's murder. However, Hamilton authorities later confirmed he had been in prison at the time of the killings, and he was released. James Fields, the only black man among the suspects, was detained along with Cook. Though the details of his case are unclear, it appears he was eventually released, as police began to suspect a white man was responsible for the murders. Harley Hackney was the husband of Mary Hackney. He and boarder Charles Eckert discovered Mary's body when they returned home from work. Both men, along with Herman Sherwing, were arrested on suspicion, but were released due to lack of evidence. Just before Hackney was set to move to Alabama, he received a witness subpoena from the coroner requiring him to stay. Although an official inquest into his wife's murder was initiated, it yielded no substantial results. Charles Eckert was a young boarder living in the Hackney's home. He and Harley discovered Mary's body while returning from their jobs at the lumber mill. Eckert denied any involvement in the murder, and, as no evidence was found against him, he was subsequently released. Herman Sherwing was a black milk delivery driver who was arrested on suspicion alongside Hackney and Eckert. Sherwing also denied any connection to the murder and was released shortly after due to insufficient evidence. Despite having 6 suspects, no one was ever charged, and the case of the Cumminsville Killer remains a mystery to this day.